Wonderful. Thank you very much. I think I'm on. Can you hear me? Yes, wonderful. We're on. One day I'll get to learn how to use these mics and stuff like that. It's not today, but one day I will. Okay, let me get set up. You're probably wondering why I've brought a bag, considering we're at the 6:30, and props at the 6:30 are not usually what's done, but everyone loves a good prop, don't they? So, as we said, we are talking about the audience of one tonight. It is the last one in our worship series. We've had 6 talks done, and you've got me finishing it off tonight. So let's have a quick recap of what we've learned so far. If you missed any of the talks, they're all on YouTube. I'd really recommend going to listen to them because I'm going to give a one-sentence summary, which does not do them justice, basically. So, first off, we had Tom speaking to us about our purpose, our priority, and he said how worship was, and let me get this right, a costly corporate cool. There we go. I got that right? Yeah, there we go. Thank you very much. Thank goodness that's out of the way. I've been practicing all week. Right. Then, the week after, we had Rachel talking to us about his presence and about the story of Mary and Martha and a reminder of what an honor it is that we can be in the Lord's presence and just to not forget what a privilege that is and to not take it for granted. The week after, Ollie talked to us about music in worship, about creating beauty, facilitating encounter and declaring truth. Sai taught us the week after that we're all worship leaders, and we talked about taking that worship into our everyday lives and allowing it to transform our everyday lives, not just on a Sunday. Creativity in worship was the next week with Vicky, and she was talking about exploring, expressing, and experimenting in our worship. Last week we had Tom looking at a Jesus-focused encounter and having that complete fixation on Jesus during worship. And this week, we're talking about an audience of one. So, I will try not to repeat what has been said over the last 6 weeks. Incredibly, I think we've managed to do really well on not repeating each other because there's just so much to say on this topic. So, yes, I will try not to repeat too much. But the Bible verse we are looking at tonight is Mark 12, verse 30. And as it's only a short one, why don't we read it all together? So, Mark 12, verse 30 says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength." Wonderful. Love the Lord your God with all your mind, all your heart, all your soul, all your strength. Something in that order, a little bit different. We'll just blame it on different translations. It's not true. Anyway. Does anyone know what the longest love letter ever written was? I'm not necessarily expecting you to. Song of Songs. Oh, that would be so much better. No, Chris said Song of Songs. That would be, wonderful. No, actually, it was not what I was going for. The longest love letter ever written, apparently, was by a French painter called Marcel Delacroix. Something like that. Thank you. And in this love letter, he wrote, "I love you," presumably in French, 1,875,000 times. I know, it was back in 1875, so he did it like 1,000 for every year it was of the date, which I think is a bit insane, but actually, as the story goes, it wasn't actually him who wrote it. He hired a scribe and got them to write it and then repeat it back to him word for word, which I feel loses a little bit of the romance in it, but who am I to say? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and with all your strength. The context for this verse, it's Jesus who says it in the Mark passage. He's in a group where there are Pharisees and Sadducees, so 2 different religious groups and religious teachers. And they're in this place, and they've basically been trying to test him all day and catch him out. This is on the build-up to the Good Friday, where Jesus was arrested, where he was crucified. This is all in the build-up to that. And he's got these 2 groups of people there. So if we look at the parallel verse, which is in Matthew 22, verse 34, it says, "Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question, 'Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?'" You notice it said they tested him with this question. This was not a friendly, "Oh, Jesus, what do you think the greatest commandment is?" They're trying to catch him out here. They really are. Some of the Pharisees and Sadducees just genuinely believed that what Jesus was teaching was contrary to what Moses taught. And both groups, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, both believed those first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, which was Moses' teaching. So they 100% believe that, and they think what Jesus is saying is against what Moses said. So that's why a lot of these guys are trying to catch him out. So they're pushing him with basically should be an impossible question, because if he says, oh, this was the most important commandment, and they can say, oh, well, what about that one? And then he goes, oh, well, yeah, that one's important too, but then what about that one? They're basically just trying to push him until he says something that they can arrest him for. But Jesus is Jesus, and he quotes from one of the first 5 books of the Bible, basically the only 5 books that he could quote from that both of these groups would be satisfied and have no response. So he quotes from Deuteronomy and just lifts this bit from the text, and they can't say anything against him. Just the wisdom of God in that, I just think is amazing. Anyway, it's basically a side note, but we'll get back onto it anyway. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. It was Valentine's Day this week. Don't know if anybody did anything special for Valentine's Day. I didn't. We typically don't do anything special for Valentine's Day. But this year, I thought, no, you don't have to it's okay. That's fine. It was inflicted by me as well. But this year, I thought I'd get him a little something that was a bit special. I say a bit special, it's not very special really. And also, it's now, the 19th or so, and it's still in this bag unwrapped. So, yeah, I think he needs the R more than I do, probably. Anyway, I will keep it vaguely related to the talk, so keep an eye out on the screen. You might notice some terrible, terrible puns as I go through that will link vaguely what I'm doing to the verse, so look out for that. For example, I've got him a Terry's chocolate orange. This is like a pantomime. You guys are great tonight. I've got him a Terry's chocolate orange because everyone loves them. And this, you could say, is the heart of the gift of what I'm giving him. Yeah? The heart of the gift. There we go. So I'm going to give him a Terry's chocolate orange. But I do love them quite a lot as well. So I will give him most of it. But I think just, it's a big orange. There's plenty of chocolate there, isn't there? So I might just take a little bit out for myself. I don't want to take too much out for myself, but I'll just take a little bit out for myself. And he can have most of it. I'm not going to deprive him of most of the chocolate orange, but I don't think he needs the whole thing. So put that back in the box. He'll never even know, will he? Unless he's watching, so I think he probably will know. But there we go, good as new. So yeah, that's the heart of the gift. Most of it, anyway. The vast majority of the heart of the gift. But we need to wrap it with some nice, strong wrapping paper. Strong wrapping paper. Yeah, thank you very much, thank you. Anything with this is that I've actually got some other presents I need to wrap up later as well. For some other, those people aren't as special to me as he is, obviously, but they are still important in my life, and I probably don't have enough paper to wrap both of the presents, but at least I can give it a go. So I'm just going to chuck my tape across the floor and cut this in half so that both of them get some, I won't get anything for everyone, but both of them can get some. Next up, we need to tape it with the tape I chucked across the floor. So I find with tape, it doesn't really matter where you focus it. It's the thought that counts. You lot got that before I did, didn't you? So with tape, it is definitely the thought that counts. Don't worry too much about how you focus it. Just roughly get it on there, nicely like that. There we go. It's probably enough, isn't it? Wonderful. So long as it's in the vicinity, I find. The tape's in the vicinity will be all right. So there we go. And last up, I need to write who it's to on it, because otherwise it will get lost, won't it? So I need to write, this one's very tenuous, I will warn you now. Who is the sole recipient? Yeah? Yeah, there we go. And because I was making a pun, I've actually spelled his name wrong on it as well. So there we go. That's it. Valentine's Day present done. Right, thank you very much. Yes, lovely. Question for you. Do we ever give God worship that looks a little bit like that? That looks a little bit like we're holding some stuff back from him. We're not quite giving it wholeheartedly. It's all there. It's just maybe not quite for God. It might be a little bit for us and God, and holding a few things back from him. Heart, for example. Do we hold back bits of our heart when we worship? And it might be because there's stuff in there that we're not very proud of, and we don't really want God to see it. He does see it, and we know he does, but we don't really want to admit that to ourselves. So we hold it back a little bit when we worship. Just don't think about that bit whilst we're in church. Or it might be because we do love God wholeheartedly, but when we're in a group of people, it's kind of embarrassing to show that love and show that affection. We're very British sometimes, aren't we? And we can't really express that when there's people around us. So yes, we do feel that love with our whole heart, but we might be a little bit shy about it and therefore not express that to God wholeheartedly. Strength. Do we try to share our strength across all of the demands in our lives, our very busy lives? It might be work or it might be family life. It's not bad things, but do we have enough strength to spread across all of those things and in worship to God? I find if we first give all of that strength to God in worship, he gives it back. He gives it back tenfold. The strength that we give to God, he returns, and it will last 10 times longer, it will go 10 times further, it will be 10 times stronger than the worship and the strength that we've given him. Do we allow our thoughts to wander off topic during worship? I definitely do. It's a very easy thing to do. Or do we pay attention to what we fill our minds with in the everyday? Do we give God time in our minds, or do we spend every quiet moment scrolling through social media or replying to emails or doing our to-do list, and we actually don't give God that time when we're quiet? It might be as simple as you're driving down a road and you see a really nice view and you just say, "Oh, wow, God, thank you for that view. Man, that is beautiful." That's worship with your mind. You've seen something, and it's just bringing that worship into your mind. Do we ever misdirect our worship? Do we get it confused with good music or a good atmosphere or lighting or different things like that? Is our worship based on which song is sung or which verse is read? Or is it based on and fueled by our own personal relationship with God? Now, I did kind of break it into the 4 components there, but I think really what this verse is saying is that these are the things that make us up. You know, we are physical beings. We are made up of a heart, soul, mind, and strength. And God is calling us to worship with all of what we are made up of. Creation is designed to worship. We are designed to worship, but creation is designed to worship as well. I'm just going to read a passage from Luke. You're very welcome to flick there with me if you want to. It's only a couple of verses. It's Luke 19. And we'll go from 36-ish, I reckon, or maybe 37. This is Jesus coming into Jerusalem. So there's crowds everywhere. They're all sort of celebrating as he's coming in. And it says, as he was drawing near, this is verse 37, already on the way down the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of his disciples began to rejoice and praise God with a loud voice for all the mighty works they had seen, saying, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." And some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." He answered, "I tell you, if these were silent, the very stones would cry out." If the very stones would cry out in worship, how much more should I be shouting my worship from the rooftops? Me, who is adopted as a daughter of the great high king, who has been forgiven for all of the stuff that I've done wrong, all of the stuff that I'm going to do wrong. If even the stones are shouting out, how much more should I be shouting out my worship? Now, when I was writing the name tag, I was a little bit distracted by my fantastic pun. And I was focused on you guys rather than focused on the person who was getting the gift. You could say that my audience was a bit too large. Huh? And we flow on to the title of tonight's talk, the audience of one. Thank you very much. So, the audience of one, it is a very helpful term of phrase, but it does need to be viewed correctly. I think there's a risk that we hear it and we get automatic associations with things which aren't necessarily true. So I'm just going to run down what does an audience of one not mean, and then we will talk about what it does mean. So, what an audience of one does not mean. It does not mean that worship is a performance. It does not mean that God is rating us, and that if we sing better or draw better, then he will get more enjoyment out of it, and it will be better worship. That's not what it means. So when we say that there's an audience involved, it's not about the performance of it. God is looking at the posture of our hearts, not the quality of our speech or singing or art or anything else that we're doing. Number 2, God is not passively watching during worship. He's not sat down in the audience watching us and ready to applaud at the end and say, oh, great job, well done, everybody. Here you go, have an interaction with me as a present. You know, it's not that sort of thing. Worship is an interaction, but God is not passively watching. He is involved when we worship. And number 3, worship is not about us. If we say that God is the audience, it implies that he's down there, we're up on the stage, all eyes are on us, and he's just watching us as well. Needless to say, that is not what we mean by an audience of one. God, I don't know how you want to think about it, but he is center stage, he's in the royal box, he owns the theatre, and we're all invited to come and worship him with the angels. It is all about God, and it is not about us at all. So, what does it mean? Well, I think when we're on our own, it's easier to sort of focus on God and have him as an audience of one, basically because there's no one else around that we can make into an audience. But we'll focus a bit more on sort of corporate worship. So like we are here tonight, where we're all together and we're worshipping God, how do we have an audience of one when there's lots of other people around? Firstly, it means that regardless of who is watching us, our eyes are fixed on God. We remember the woman from Tom's sermon last week. If you weren't here, definitely go and catch that one. But she goes into a room where there's a lot of very important men eating dinner and having a very important discussion, and there's lots of people around watching these men having their discussion and hoping to glean a bit of knowledge or a bit of entertainment. And she walks into this room, and she is not someone who would be welcomed there, typically. And she is weeping, and she goes straight to Jesus. She goes to his feet, and she weeps on his feet so much that she wets them, and then she dries them with her hair. And it's this absolutely outrageous display of worship and of love, but she did it because she wasn't looking at anybody else in the room. Her eyes were fixed only on Jesus. It's just a beautiful example of someone having that audience of one, where she doesn't care who's around. She doesn't care that all eyes have suddenly turned to her and they're all tutting and shaking their heads. She couldn't care less. Her eyes are focused on Jesus. Number 2, we shouldn't let our fear of judgment from others stop us from enjoying uninhibited worship. Galatians 1:10, I think we're talking about it again in a few weeks actually, but it says, am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I was still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. If you worship God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, you might get some funny looks from people. You might get some funny looks from family members, work colleagues, potentially even other people at church. Some of them might get it and they might be positive about it and they might want to know, what's this change in you? How's your attitude different? How's your perspective changed? But other people might have more of a negative reaction because they might not understand what's happening. And the question we have to ask ourselves is God worth it? Is he worth embarrassing yourself for? Is he worth potentially sacrificing your reputation for? Is God worth it? Let's not get so caught up in people-pleasing that it is prioritized over pleasing God. And number 3, worship is not for anyone but God. Even Si, when he's leading worship, he's not leading worship for you, he's leading worship for God. Worship isn't even for me when I'm worshiping. And God does bless us with these beautiful interactions and these beautiful moments where we feel so close to him, and it is an incredible blessing. But that's not why we worship. We worship God because he's God, and he's worthy of our worship. So, back to my present. Terrible, isn't it? Is the issue with this that it looks like a party in chocolate orange that's been wrapped by a toddler? No. He might disagree, but no, that is not the issue with this gift. The issue is that I did not give it wholeheartedly at all. There's a story of, later on in this same passage of Mark 12, of the widow's offering. And I'm just going to read it to you. There'll be an image on the screen of potentially, the widow giving her offering. But it's Mark 12 from verse 41. And it says, Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." And I love this image because you can see a little smile on her face. She's not giving it out of obligation. She's giving it out of love, out of devotion, out of wholehearted worship to God. And that's what we're all called to do. We're called to worship with all of what we've got on that day. And some days that might look like jumping around, shouting, waving our hands in the air, and we're full of energy. And other days that might look like, yeah, I'm going to go to church today. Yeah, I'm going to stand up today. But we're not called to give a set quantity. That's not what God measures it on. He's just calling us to give all of what we do have on that day. And you might be sat here tonight thinking, I'm not really feeling it tonight. My heart feels a bit empty. I don't feel very close to God right now. I'm mentally or physically exhausted. I've got so much going on. That's okay. God's asking you to give all of what you do have, 100% of what you do have to him. I'm going to ask the band to start coming back up. And there's going to be a few questions on the screen. And this is just for you to do by yourself. You don't need to talk to anyone else about it. And we're just going to look through the questions and have a think on what your answers would be. The first one, do you think God is worthy of worship? Now, I know the Sunday school answer is yes. And I know you all know that the Sunday school answer is yes. But what do you think? Do you think that God is worthy of worship? And how much worship do you think he's worthy of? The next one, is there anything you don't want God to see? It might be useful to think through the 4 aspects, the heart, soul, mind, strength. Is there anything in there that you don't want God to see? And the third one, what does your worship look like at the moment? With the capacity you have tonight, with the stuff that you've had going on this week, with the stuff you've got going on next week, what does your worship look like right now? And what do you want it to look like? And as the band start to play, go back through and talk them through with God. You might say, God, I know you're worthy of worship, but I feel like maybe I need to get to know you a bit better to see how worthy you are. I know the right answer, but maybe I don't feel it myself too much. I've been told it, but I don't feel it. Or you might say, God, there's this thing. I know you've seen it. It's in my heart. I know you've asked me to change it, and I don't want to. or I'm trying to and it's really difficult. Would you help me? Oh God, my worship looks a bit tired at the moment. I find it hard. I'm struggling with it. I want it to look like this. Please help. So just have a look through those questions as we start to worship again.